Hi everyone, thanks for coming tonight. As Mike said, my name's Susan Mercer and I'm a senior experience researcher here at MadPow. And I'm going to talk about strengthening moderation skills tonight. And just by way of a brief introduction, before I came to MadPow, I was in the master's program for human factors and information design at Bentley. And before that, I had about 15 years of experience in the UX design field. So I've done a little bit of moderating, and when I talk about moderating, I'm also going to talk about interviewing, because for what I'm talking about tonight, a lot of it's very similar, okay? So what I want to do is share with you some tips that I've learned throughout the years, and I hope that they can be successful for you. So when I first started moderating, once I got the basics down, I said, okay, I got this. I ran a few studies, I seemed to get the rhythm of everything. And then I said, now what? How do I strengthen my skills? And when I did that, I started to reflect back on all of my experiences. And I'm going to tell you a story. So this was an experience I had way back in high school. I grew up in a small town east of Cleveland, and I played trumpet in the high school band. Okay, sorry about that. So I grew up east of Cleveland, played in the high school marching band. I played trumpet, and I played in the jazz band as well. And I was very lucky. I got to play in the All Cleveland Youth Jazz Orchestra. And one of the things we got to do is we got to perform with Ellis Marsalis. So if any of you have heard of Branford or Witten, this is their father, pretty good jazz pianist. I was actually pretty excited about this. I played third trumpet. So during our rehearsal with him, we were playing and we were doing a lot of doo-wop, doo-wop, doo-wop stuff. And then all of a sudden he cut us off and he looked at us. And he said, "Kids, quit playing like you're white." And we all kind of looked at each other nervously because we were. And there wasn't much we could do about that. But he said, "Don't play the notes on the page. Play the music." And I'll admit it took me about 10 years to really understand that message, to really understand what it meant to play music instead of the notes on the page. But in reflecting back on learning moderating, I realized the same applies to moderating and interviewing too. You don't want to just read the questions from the page in front of you. You want to have a conversation. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, about how do you take your moderating and interviewing skills from reading those questions on the page to having a good conversation with somebody. How do you learn to build rapport, create that smooth conversation, encourage that participant to talk, yet at the same time maintain your objectivity and your neutrality so that you don't bias answers that they ask you? And how do you listen effectively? And in short, how do you just be human? Okay? So I thought about a lot about this, and I said, well, what are we really trying to do when we moderate an interview? And in my opinion, we want to elicit honest thoughts from participants in an unbiased manner. And to me, the two hardest words to meet in that sentence are honest and unbiased. And that's what I always struggle with. And I'm just going to give you a quick example. So I could ask all of you, would you like to try one of my chocolate chip oyster herring brownies? They're really good. And if I said that to Rachel, what would you say, Rachel?
No, thank you.
Oh, but they're really good. You sure you don't want one?
I'm sure.
You're sure? Okay, great. But then I could turn to my colleague, Dan, in the back and say, hey, Dan, you want to try one of these brownies? No, they sound terrible. Now, what's the difference there? I don't know Rachel very well. She was being polite. That's what most of us do to strangers. But I know Dan pretty well, and he knows he's not going to offend me if he tells me that. And the point I'm getting at is sometimes, particularly when you're talking to strangers, it's hard to be honest. And believe it or not, linguistic anthropologists have studied this. And they've come up, by observing conversations and detailed analysis, have found that when people talk to strangers or people they don't know very well, they don't impose, they give options, they be friendly. there's 3 rules to politeness. And really what happens, they've observed, is that humans are balancing this fact that I'm an individual and I have honest opinions that I want to share with you, but at the same time I want to be socially accepted. Because that is important. So in other words, getting away from the linguistic anthropologist speak in English, we're often polite rather than honest to strangers. And really what that comes down to is in that situation, social acceptance is more important to us than honesty. And we'll guess at what they think is the right answer so that we don't offend or we don't look like we're answering, providing the wrong answer. But the most important thing is it's second nature. We're not doing this on purpose all the time. We're often not aware that we're even doing it. So how do you get beyond that politeness? Well, I think when you're talking with strangers, you're overly polite, yet when you're talking to a good friend, when you're talking to somebody you're more familiar with, the trust comes into play. So I think when you're moderating and interviewing, the more you can start to build their trust quickly and move along that familiarity line, you're going to have a better chance at uncovering some honesty and less of the politeness. So how do you do that? It's a nice thing to say, but how do you do that? I've got 4 key tips that I want to share with you tonight that have worked for me. One is being trustworthy up front. In my introduction, I always tell people, I talk about confidentiality. What you say to me is not going beyond this room with your name attached to it, okay? If I'm recording, I tell them. If I have people listening in, I let them know. I ask their permission. And I let them know what I'll do with information I collect. And I tell them I'm neutral. If I'm doing a usability test, hey, I didn't design what you're about to see. If you like it, it's not going to make me feel good. If you hate it, it won't hurt my feelings. My job is to make sure that I'm getting honest opinions from you today. There's no right or wrong answers. It's really what you think. That's what I want to hear. And the best practice is to use a consent form. Put it out in their language, in plain English. Or in a study that I did where we had Spanish-speaking individuals that we talked through via an interpreter, we did it in Spanish so that they could understand exactly what we were talking about and set those boundaries correctly. So then the second step is to build rapport. Once you've got your participant, start greeting them with a smile and use their name. That's important. Because after all, Dale Carnegie said that a person's name is to that person is the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So by using their name and greeting them warmly, you're letting them know that you make them feel important and that you sincerely care about them. And that's going to start building that rapport very quickly. And start with some small talk. Perhaps when you walk them in from the door. So how was it getting in here okay? Did you find us okay? Did you have any trouble? How was the traffic? Or if you're on a remote session, oh, how's the weather out in Seattle? Oh, it's raining today? Surprise. Stick to some safe topics, and don't ask them direct questions right away. Start with something kind of neutral. And look for those shared experiences, because that's how you can kind of build some rapport. Now, I had a very nervous participant once who grew up in a small town not far from the small town I grew up in. Once I shared that fact and we talked a little bit about a couple places we knew, he relaxed. Because he knew, hey, I'm kind of like him. I couldn't be that bad, And be empathetic. If they had trouble finding the office, apologize. Let them know that you understand their point of view. In the Seattle example, oh, it's raining there? Oh, it's raining here too. I hate rainy days. You're starting to build that commonality with them and build some familiarity. And if you're comfortable with it, this comes down to personal style, go ahead and be yourself and inject a little bit of humor. Make a joke about yourself, make a joke about the situation, but avoid making jokes about them, because you don't know how they're going to react to that. Okay? And just as an example, that Seattle, oh, is it raining there? I said that, and then the participant said, yeah, well, you know what they say, April showers bring May flowers. And I responded with my favorite second grade joke. Oh yeah, and what do Mayflowers bring? Pilgrims. There we go. We had a good laugh. So the short version is, when you're building the rapport at the beginning of the session, you want to show them that you're human too, and start building that relationship. And then I want to talk about engaging in comfortable conversation. So once we get some of that rapport going, we need to switch gears. We need to switch into more the neutral observer mode, the interviewer mode, the moderator, usability testing moderator mode. And there's two schools of usability testing moderation techniques that I want to talk a little bit about tonight. One school of thought is that when you put a prototype in front of a participant, the moderator should really keep silent. Just tell them to think out loud. And the only thing that the moderator should say is keep talking, or another very neutral prompt to get them to continue. I have a hard time with that one because I feel that it's very awkward for the participant. As human beings, we have expectations about what a social interaction is. And a usability testing session is somewhat of a social interaction. It's just in the lab. And it creates that awkward feeling when they say something and we just say, keep talking. They're not expecting that. And it makes them feel like they're in a study. I tend to believe that the second technique works better. That moderators should create a conversation where the participant is the primary speaker. So we can still have a conversation. I can still be neutral. I can get all the information that I need, but I'm making the participant feel comfortable. I'm following those social norms of conversation. They're not feeling like they're in a study. But I still have to pay attention to maintaining neutrality and avoiding bias, or minimizing it as much as I can. So what is that comfortable conversation? A conversation has turn taking. So I say something, you say something, then it's my turn again. And as I said, these linguistic anthropologists have done a lot of studies about, well, how do you know when your turn's over? How do you know when the other person's turn is over? Who says what to start a new turn? And there's some things that we can learn about that, some conversational cues. And one of the things I want to talk about is acknowledgement tokens. These are things like if somebody says something, I might say, uh-huh, mm-hmm, okay, things like that. And really what that's implying to the other person is that I've listened to what you have to say, that I want you to continue speaking because I don't think you're done yet. So that's really just letting them know, I am listening, keep going, in a very neutral fashion. But the word you use for that acknowledgement token is very important, because some can indicate change of speakership. So if somebody says something, I say, yeah, studies have shown that more than half the time, that's an indicator that I'm now going to add something new to the conversation, that I'm going to take over and take my turn. Yeah, I heard that the other day, and, or, oh, may also be used as something to say, oh, that reminds me. I heard what you said. It reminded me of something, and now I'm going to change the conversation. So you want to be careful about what particular acknowledgement tokens or what they call back-channel communication you use. Because some can introduce bias, too. Oh, or interesting, can indicate that it was an unexpected answer. And if you're in a usability test and you're showing somebody a prototype and you say, oh, what are they going to think? They're going to be afraid, uh-oh, I gave the wrong answer. Even though we said there are no right or wrong answers, that's their first instinct. They're going to switch to being socially acceptable versus being honest. So you got to watch that. Things like yes, perfect, great. All of that can also indicate that, oh, this might be a bias, but more on the positive side. Really? Those things can indicate disagreement. So again, things to watch out for. And you'll notice that the tone is key. So one of the things to practice as a moderator is to keep an even tone. And neutral is best, because that's, in my opinion, that's how you keep from biasing. So things like, mm-hmm, uh-huh, continue, tell me more, okay. Again, acknowledging that I heard what you have to say, I'm interested, and I want you to say more. And in fact, one study looked at mm-hmm or uh-huh versus silence. So in a job interview situation, when the interview used those phrases, the interviewee spoke 31% more phrases than when they were silent. So it does work. And of course, staying neutral and accepting. Asking open-ended questions, that's an easy one. But the quick tip that I found is if you stick to the who, what, when, where, why, how that you learned in elementary school, that helps, that always makes sure that you ask an open-ended question. If you start with a verb, you're going to get a yes, no. But it's important to really listen. So pay attention. Stay in the moment. Now, it's really hard when you're on a remote session, when you're just talking over a phone or a WebEx. That's why I always try to write notes. It keeps me focused on what's being discussed. You want to look at the participant, but also be quiet. Give them time to say things that they need to. And watch your reactions. You know, we talked about surprise, overly agreeing, negative. And try not to laugh. But there are certain situations where you have to be human. For example, a colleague of mine, I was taking notes, so I was watching this session. She had a participant who in the nighttime was a stand-up comedian. As you can imagine, every time he said something, he was trying to get her to laugh. That was challenging, and sometimes you give in and give them a little laugh just to get them moving. But then you bring them back. But the most important thing to me is to be yourself. No one's perfectly neutral. And if you do make a mistake and say some of these things that might not be the best choice, recover gracefully and move on. You know, interesting. Oh, I haven't heard that perspective before. Tell me more. That's a great way to recover. And interject some rapport building comments when you need to. You know, I usually try to get the rapport over at the front and then kind of get more into the neutral stuff during the middle of the interview or session. But if I have a quiet or uncomfortable participant, I'll start doing some more rapport building, you know, because that can often get them to relax and open up a little bit more. But most importantly, be quiet. A few reasons for that. One is that when you're having a conversation, if somebody's going to agree with you, they almost always do it immediately. If they're going to disagree, it's going to take a few seconds. So if you're quiet, you give them a chance to think through and then say their disagreement. Or if you don't respond to their answer, they may say, she's going to disagree with me, so therefore I'm going to say some more to enforce my opinion. Okay? Some people are uncomfortable with silence, so they'll just keep talking. But more importantly, you can't be more neutral than not saying anything. So those are some tips that I've learned that I hope can be useful to you. And I'm going to go over this really quickly. So once you master those, how do you keep your skills sharp? Watch your videos. That's painful, I know. But that's the only way you can identify where you need to improve. Or if you're lucky, have colleagues show you. Learn from others. Watch others moderate or interview. I always learn from that. A new phrase, a new technique, something. And listen to talk radio interviews too. I've learned some great techniques from them. And then practice. That's the most important thing. And one of the things I found is I started using some of these conversational techniques in my everyday conversations. And lo and behold, it's actually enriched some of my personal relationships. But more importantly, now when I'm in a moderating situation, I get stuck and I panic, I revert to my everyday conversation, which is still the right answer. So it's a win-win right there. So practice. Okay? And I have some references here. There's some great books on moderating usability testing if you're not familiar with one. And just a plug for a friend of mine too. Fiona Tranquata and Donna Tedesco have a book coming out in this fall about moderating, so have a look for that. Again, some practical tips on what to do, what not to do. So thank you. Do we have time for a question? Bill?
So in your middle section about engaging in conversation, there's a whole other spectrum that you probably absorbed mentally but didn't mention, which is that people can fall anywhere on the spectrum from very introverted to very extroverted.
Yep.
And because treating an introvert like an extrovert or treating an extrovert like an introvert is going to make them close up rather than open.
Right. That's a wonderful point. Unfortunately, I couldn't talk about everything tonight in 20 minutes, but thank you. I'm going to be speaking at UXPA Boston, so I'll have a longer talk there, maybe some more. One more question.
I thought it was interesting where you were talking about kind of jazzing it up. So sometimes I think about or worry about, when I'm doing tests, I like to mix things up sometimes, ask questions a different way, ask things in a different order as they kind of organically happen as the session runs. But then I worry about it's no longer consistent.
That's a great point. And I guess what I should have prefaced this with is what I was focusing on here is more formative testing, definitely not summative. When you're doing summative testing, you definitely need to be a lot more strict. Don't go off script as much. But I think that's a great point about when you change things up, does it introduce some bias? And I think there's a wonderful research experiment here to test those two different paradigms I was talking about, the silent keep talking versus the conversational approach. And for those of you who have researched user research, there's a whole discussion about evaluator bias. When you're looking at the results of a usability test, different people see different things. I still think there's a moderator bias as well, that different people will get different results. And that's a wonderful opportunity for the scientific research. So good point. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to share with you guys some things that I've observed in working with organizations large and small, and some tips that I think will help you guys improve the presence of critique in your own internal conversations. So what do I mean when I say critique? Critique often comes up in conversations about feedback. And quite often we interchange the words critique and feedback and use them as if they mean the same thing. Feedback is really nothing more specific than a response, all right? You put something into the world responds to it, that's its feedback, all right? We talk about feedback loops when we're designing things. Critique is a much more active, deliberate process, all right? Critique is this form of analysis where you compare something, a design, an artifact of some sort, to the goals or the objectives that that artifact is trying to achieve. And you try to judge why the designer made certain choices, what were they trying to achieve with those choices, and how effective were those choices in getting to those objectives, all right? So I talk on this topic a lot with a colleague of mine, Aaron Irizarry, and we've gone out and we've asked designers, developers, subject matter experts, people who are working on products and services for examples of some of the worst, or in some cases best, critique that they've seen. And these are some of the things we got back. And this is my personal favorite, right there. These are actual quotes. They came up in real conversations, real business meetings, right? And so when we talk about critique, we're still hearing things like this. And just so no one thinks that I'm being biased and that this is a talk about how designers have to suffer through getting horrific feedback from clients, this is not like me regurgitating the Clients from Hell website. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but I'd encourage you to check it out. These quotes here actually came from designers to their teams, right? So we all kind of struggle with this element of critique. So when I talk about critique, I'm talking about critical thinking, right? It's about asking yourself, what was the designer trying to do? How did they try to do it? Were they successful? And it's really important that we have these kinds of conversations, that we factor this into the discussions we have with our teams, because I would bet good money that all of you, or most of you at least, are working as part of a team. You're not alone, right? You're not the one creating the product, designing it, developing it, selling it, marketing it, right? You have to work with a group of people. You're going to have to make decisions together. And wouldn't it be great if those decisions that you made were based on how well certain decisions got you towards the goals that you're trying to achieve? Right? Isn't that what we want in our conversations? So critique is really, really important. And if we can step back and we can think about critique and we can think about how to bring it into our conversations, we can become better communicators, right? We can build trust in our teams. And even more importantly, we can build the sense of collaboration. Learning to critique well makes you a better collaborator. All of this seems really, really obvious. I don't think I've said anything that's news to any of you right now, all right? But yet we still see quotes like the ones I shared. I didn't make those up. That's still what we're seeing. So why is it so difficult? Why are these conversations going south so quickly in so many organizations? So that's where I want to share with you guys kind of 10 bad habits that we've seen and what to do about them. The first is that we react, all right? Reactions are normal. We're all going to have reactions. The problem is that we verbalize those reactions way too quickly in these discussions, all right? We're just throwing out whatever the first thing is that comes to our mind. In a critique, you've got to hold on to that gut reaction and ask yourself why you're having it. What caused it? What is it that the designer did that made you want to vomit? All right? So you need to be a little bit more deliberate in what you're saying. Think about your reactions. Ask yourself questions about what the designer was trying to do. All right? Not only that, but designers or whoever is presenting their work, we need to give the people that we want feedback from an opportunity to not just react. Okay? This is a big thing for a lot of junior designers that I talk to right out of school. They really want that meeting where they get up in front of the room. They've been off at their desk for like a week. They've got their design, and they want to unveil it, and ta-da! And everybody's going to pat them on the back, right? No ta-da moments. In the ta-da moment, the critic has nothing they can do but react. They haven't had time to think about things. So you need to make sure that you provide people with time. Send out materials ahead of time if you can. Provide a little bit of context. Only show them what you need to, but give them time to think about things. Next bad habit is that we get selfish. All right? And this happens again on both sides, giving and receiving. All right? Quite often we see people giving feedback not because they want to help the designer understand the impact of design decisions that they've made or talk about how something is or isn't working towards goals, but we see the feedback because the person just wants to be heard. They want everybody else in the room to know that they're smart or that they have opinion or that they have an idea. That's a very selfish act. And on the receiving side, we see people asking for feedback, asking for critique when they don't really want it. They want that validation. They want that hug. They want that job well done. You've got to make sure that the intent is right on both sides. That the person asking for the feedback really wants it and is going to do something with it. And that the person giving it is really giving it for the sole purpose of helping to iterate on the design. Next up, common foundation. Biggest problem we see in any organization, in any project, not just from a perspective of critique, but just the project in general and why so many projects go south. You've got stakeholders in the room that all have different ideas around what it is you're doing. They all have different goals. They all have different objectives. There's no common foundation. And so you get into discussions about the design and people are trying to take it off in different directions and you end up with a very fragmented discussion that you can't really make heads or tails out of. You need to start from a common foundation, and luckily we have a lot of really awesome tools to help us do this already. The problem is that we don't use them, or don't use them as effectively as we could. We have personas, all right? If you create personas and you have agreement that those are the people that you are actually trying to design for, you can refer back to those in your discussion. You can say, well, that's great, I understand that's your opinion, but does that factor into how our persona Sam over here is actually going to use this product, right? You can set design principles. You can draw design principles directly out of your research. Good design principles should allow you to say no to ideas more than they say yes. They should help you constrain the design, right? So if you set design principles at the beginning of the project and you've all agreed to them, you can ask how certain feedback relates to a design principle. You can use scenarios in the same way, right? So set those up at the beginning. Have those at the ready so that as you have your discussions, you can facilitate through using them, referring back to them. We don't focus. Often we're designing big, complex things. We put them in front of somebody and we say, okay, what do you think? And they don't know where to start. They can't start. It's the paradox of choice. There's too much. We need to do our best to focus in the conversation. We need to ask about certain flows, ask about a certain screen, ask about a certain function, ask about a certain design principle and how the design holds that to that design principle or doesn't. Focus the conversation. When Aaron and I ask students a lot about critique, they always bring up, kind of the textbook answer. It's about strengths and weaknesses. And then we ask, okay, so why do you think you talk about strengths? And the common answer we get back is, well, we want the designer to feel good about what they've done, about some aspect of what they've done, so that they'll be more receptive to the things we're going to tell them they did wrong. That's not why you talk about strengths. It's very important that, yes, the designer feels comfortable with the feedback they're receiving, but it's more important to talk about strengths, because if the designer's going to go iterate based on this discussion, do you want them to iterate away from something that is actually working well? Probably not. More than that, as designers, we're all very accustomed to abstracting things and looking for patterns and borrowing from those patterns. So if the designer's done something that's working really well in one spot, maybe they can borrow from that and improve on another. Right? It's very important to talk about strengths. We don't have discussions. A lot of times, we'll see designers go into rooms, they'll ask for feedback, and then they start taking notes. And it's great to take notes, you have to take notes, but that's all they do. Good critique requires dialogue. It requires you to ask questions on both sides. The person giving the feedback needs to be able to ask about, what was your intent? What was your thinking? What were you trying to achieve? What were the constraints that you had to work around? The designer has to be able to ask questions about the feedback they're hearing in order to make sure that they're really understanding what's being said. All right? And often, if you're just sitting there taking notes and just trying to, copy verbatim what people are saying, you're not having that dialogue. You're not engaged in a conversation and finding common ground and equivalent understanding in what's being talked about. And even worse is that we find lots of organizations sending emails, asking for feedback in emails. And so they expect that there's a list. You're going to get a list of feedback, and that list is going to magically make sense. You're not going to need to have a follow-up conversation, but inevitably you do, and then another one after that, probably. Right? It needs to be a dialogue. We get defensive. All right? You've created something. You've put your talent, your time, your expertise into something. You've created this thing. It's inevitable that you're going to feel attached to it. You're going to try to defend it the second somebody tries to say something about it. All right? As designers, we need to be open to the idea, the fact, that there is always room for improvement. Okay? And the best way to know how to improve something is to understand how what you have now is or isn't working. And that's where critique can come in. We have to be open to this process. We have to want this process. Whoop. Not sure what's happening there. There we go. And carrying on from that, we don't participate. All right? The easiest way that you can get out of this defensive realm that you're in when you're presenting your work is to participate in the critique. Become one of the critics. Get your own mindset in that analytical frame so that you're right alongside everybody else in the room trying to analyze against the goals, against the principles, and understand how your design decisions are working or not working. Okay? Not only does that help you, but it will also actually help the other people in the room as well. If anybody in that room is a little timid, a little hesitant to give you feedback because they don't want to hurt your feelings, seeing you doing that same thing, that will help them feel more comfortable. Everybody loves to problem solve. I bet all of you who have done usability studies have at one point or another encountered the participant not describing what they think is wrong or problematic with the screen that they're looking at, but to start to tell you what they think the solution would be, right? We snap into that very quickly, and designers are way, way worse about it. Designers won't even listen to what you think the problem is. They just start solving it. You can't do that in a critique. Critique is about analysis, and the second you start trying to problem solve, you've switched your brain over. And if you're doing this in a group, now you're switching your brain over and you're trying to switch everybody else's brain too. So you've got other people in the room that are now trying to visualize this new solution that you're proposing. You've got other people in the room still trying to analyze the solution that's there in front of them. And probably if you're letting this happen, you've got other people in the room trying to come up with their own solution. All right? Problem solving is inevitably going to happen. What you have to do as a designer is you have to facilitate away from it. All right? So when someone starts to talk about a solution, you have to ask them, well, what problem is that solution solving? What are you trying to solve by doing that? How is that fixing what you're seeing? As the designer yourself, you also have to stop yourself from doing it because you need to listen to what everybody is saying in the room. And if you're sitting there concocting new ideas in your brain as they're trying to give you feedback, you're not actively listening, right? So you have to put the brakes on yourself. So you have to be able to facilitate this conversation, know when to stop the problem solving and say, that sounds like you have a really great idea for how we can address this. Did I capture the problem that you're seeing accurately, and can I follow up with you later so we can explore that together? How many of you have ever been to a meeting called a design review? Okay. We find that a lot of organizations have them. We find that a lot of organizations think that this is where critique should be happening. And design reviews are really a bad match for critique. Design reviews, more often than not, are based on some form of approval, capturing some form of approval. It's about saying, we've finished this step, and now we can move on to this other step. And that's not what critique is about. Critique is about iteration. When you critique something, it should be expected that you are going to then iterate on the design based on what you learn, right? If a design review isn't about approval, the other thing we see is that they're to-do lists of things to change. You didn't get my approval this time, but if you do X, Y, and Z and come back to me in 2 days, I'll give you my stamp then. Again, not critique, all right? In a critique, there should be no kind of to-do list. There's just new learnings. And the designer is responsible for taking those learnings away and deciding what to do with them, how to modify the design, who to follow up with and explore new solutions with. All right? There's no task list coming out of a critique. So those are my 10 biggest bad habits that we see in organizations that prevent them from having good critique. I want to make sure we kind of keep everything moving along. This is part of a larger talk and workshop, and I'll actually be doing the talk on April 30th as part of a free webinar that MadPow will be offering. You can go to madpow.com and get more information there. And also at the Boston UXPA conference next month, I'll be doing the talk there as well. All right. Any questions? We got time for questions, Mike? One question? Any questions? Going once? Going twice?
You talked about how the team doesn't have a common foundation.
Yes.
And then personas are a way to get the team on a common
Yep.
foundation. But are there advantages to the team not having a common foundation and a critique?
No. No. So the question was, I talked about common foundation and personas as one way of building that common foundation, and whether or not there are advantages to not having a common foundation in a critique. There are advantages to having different perspectives and different subject matter expertise, so the developer versus the marketer and those kinds of things. But you need agreement on the problems that you're trying to solve and the goals you have for solving them and who you're solving them for. You need that common foundation at least to start from. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. Glad to see you. I first of all want to excuse my thick Björk accent. I come from Iceland. Please give me a sign if you know I mumble into something that you really can't understand. My background is in psychology and in computer science. I have been working in software development since the turn of the century. Now you're doing the math. No, I'm not. I'm over 100 years old. It's last, you know. And today I wanted to talk to you about a thought that I had this last year. And it kind of sums it up here. Your design is only as good as your developer. Now, first a little background. I firmly believe that we have superpowers, okay? We have powers to change the world for the better. And I believe this because I believe that the way that we interact in the world, the atmosphere that we create around us is based on how we interact, and that is based on our experiences. And if we're constantly set up to fail, if we're constantly trying to do something that frustrates us, if we're constantly not succeeding, then that reflects on our self-image and that reflects on how we interact with each other. Okay? And I know so because this guy here, he's partaking in the World Championship in mobile phone throwing, which they have every year in Finland. And if people have created gadgets that inspire such rage and frustration, that people will travel from afar to compete in who can hurl these devices across a football field, then a lot of negative energy has been released into the world. And I believe that we as researchers, as academics, as designers, we have the superpower to make sure that these gadgets aren't designed this way. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So in this light, I'm always trying to think about how can I become a better designer so that I can use my superpowers to create a better world. And last year, as I was moving over here, I had an opportunity to stop for a while and think about, okay, how can I improve? What should I focus on? What should I learn? And among the lint that I found in my navel was a thought that came as a bit of a surprise to me, but maybe not. I analyzed all my past design projects, and I thought about all the successes and all the failures, and I thought about what is the difference between them, and a thought just struck me. Great developers make me a great designer, because they take my design and they breathe life into it, and they improve it in the process. Does this strike true with anybody? Okay. So I started thinking about, okay, if this is true, then all great digital experiences are made in the collaboration between a designer and a developer. Okay. And I mean, it may sound obvious, because as a designer, without a developer, all I can do is to create fancy images. And that's not what my users are looking for. That's not even what my customers are looking for. Okay. And without designers, developers, they create, often inadvertently, experiences that set people up to fail. And very often we find the situation where there is a designer and there is a developer, but for some strange reason they never meet. Okay. And then you get this feedback that I loved that Adam had. What the hell is this? Okay. So this collaboration, creating together something wonderful that struck me. And I thought, okay, this is something that is very important. And together, I know we can create great things. And I know developers that I've worked with that just get it, and together it's amazing to be in that team. But not all developers, they get it. To collaborate, you have to work with someone that wants to be there. You can't collaborate with somebody who does not want to or does not know to collaborate with you. That makes sense. It's a bit like playing tennis alone. Okay, you serve it up. And nothing's happened. Okay. So I started thinking about, okay, we know this collaboration is very important. And I have been in projects where this has worked, and it's been beautiful. So why isn't this always like this? When I walk into a room and I present myself to a development team, why do I feel like I've just served up and nobody is serving it back? Why are they looking at me like they don't understand why I'm even there? And then I started thinking about it, and this shouldn't come as a surprise to me because I'm a computer scientist. For the past decade, I've taught the graduate human factors course at the University of Iceland. I know computer scientists, I know developers, coders, and this sums up what they know about what I do. Okay. Their idea about design is haute couture on a runway, fashion. Their idea about the human and human-computer interaction, psychology, somebody on the bench speaking about their mother. They have no idea why they should even collaborate with me. So I started thinking about, okay, so I come into these teams and I sit down, and it's not only that they've no idea why I'm there, it's that they have preconceived ideas about me, and they can't relate it to what it is that they do. Okay, and we're going to run through a couple of these preconceived ideas. The most prevalent of them all is the myth of the stupid user. And this is something that are not only found with engineers, or it's very prevalent. People they don't understand that you could do something to inspire understanding with somebody else. Okay? They don't understand that something that you do helps somebody else make a certain decision. Okay? In their mind, if they create something and they're reasonable and intelligent people, if other people that are reasonable and intelligent can't find their way through it, well, then there must be something wrong on their side, right? And there's nothing I can do about it because I can't make somebody else smarter, right? They're just... So they don't see how any of this talk that what I'm talking about in relation to the user, why it is their problem. Because it's the user's problem. Okay, and that's the most prevalent preconception that I come across. And the best antidote to that is to have them watch a user use what they have created. More than one. And all of a sudden they realize there's a different viewpoint that they had never thought about, but it's perfectly valid. And that maybe, therefore, they need to think about how many viewpoints there are to understand, to get how to change what they're creating. And just introducing them to basic things of psychology, like memory or attention span or how people make decisions. And then they start to realize that anything that they present affects how somebody else makes a decision. Anybody come across the myth of the stupid user? Another one is that, okay, I walk into the room and I'm introduced as the designer, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. You're that usability person. I know usability. I know Jacob Nielsen. You're here to tell me that I can't use any of my fancy HTML5 and my good JavaScript because everything should be really plain. You know, you're the sensible shoe of fashion design. That's what you are. And then you need to talk to them and tell them, well, no, it's emotional design is so important because they help people understand, they make things enjoyable. Aesthetics are also very important. Make them understand that these are all parts of the experience design. And also you could point out to them that even Jacob Nielsen had to redesign this website. Have you seen this? I'm amazed. Yet another preconception that I've come across in the development team that I've worked with. The exact opposite. Oh, you're a designer. Oh, so you're here to make things fancy and artsy. You're that Björk dress, the swan dress that she wore to the Oscar, right? And you're going, no, well, not really. Oh, how can I press play on this? Can I? Yeah. You have to understand that people that are trained as engineers and computer scientists that excel in that environment, they're functional people. They want to create something that works. So if somebody shows up with them and shows them something that's so fancy and so artsy that you can't make heads or tails of it, that just bothers them. It actually bothers me too. We're at the menu system, if you didn't know. So we're about a minute into this video, and I'm still not at the item that I wanted to select. Okay. It bothers me too much. Anyways. Yet another preconception is, I can do that. They don't understand why you would be called to action when they've been doing this for years, okay? And some of them, they really can. Some of them have the talent of both understanding the user, having knowledge of HCI, and being developers. And if you find somebody like that, treat them like the rock star that they are. Help them hone their skills, you know, point them to new books or blogs to read or whatnot. But some cannot. They think they can, but they don't have all the information that they need. But you can work with those because they at least understand that there's something that they can do. So you can train them, you can help them, you know, get better at it, okay? And then last preconception that I come up with is, you know, I show up with the development team, you know, ready to help, I serve up, and they're like, just don't mess with my stuff, okay? Just you know, you can do your designy stuff over there, just leave me out of it. And I realized that people who code and who excel at it and are really good at it, they just want to do that because it's like having magical powers. You write a couple of lines of text and then you compile and run and it does something. If that's not a magical power, I don't know what is, right? So they want to do that. And anything that takes them out of that zone, meetings, unclear requirements, information that's missing, that bothers them, right? So as soon as they realize that I can be used for exactly that, I become a very valuable partner. If I'm a step ahead of them, here you go, you're coming into this part of the software, all the information that you need, go ahead. Oh, you need something from somebody, I'll go get it. Then we've got a really good partnership going on. And it's not like I prescribe exactly what they do. I design it, but it goes through their fingers. Of course, it has their fingerprints all over it, because they breathe life into the design. So I'm not telling them exactly what to do, I'm feeding them the information. Does that make sense? Now, I mentioned these preconceptions because when I come into development teams like this, I find that I'm more working on them, on the preconceptions, than I'm working on the project that we wanted to be working on, right? And it's frustrating because there's plenty to do. But yet I have to educate and be with them. And that's the only way for me to function in the team, is to actually go through the motions, because you can't force feed them. Or a team that has, you can't make the team do something that they don't understand the value of. That's what I'm trying to say. But I also come to understand that all of the teams that I've worked with and my students, they have come to understand the value of what I do, because every developer can appreciate clearer requirements and scope. They can appreciate not doing unnecessary work. 1 week, you're supposed to work on this function. Next week, no, second thought, we're not going to have it in the application after all. Being able to focus on coding, like I was saying earlier. Creating wonderful things. Of course they appreciate that. And being appreciated. If you're working in-house with a development team, and you are interfacing with the users, and the users are telling you the good and the bad about what you've created, please don't just tell the development team the bugs. Don't just relay that. Also relay the very excited user that's going, this is just wonderful. This shaves off so many minutes of this boring task that I have to do every day. Because they could, of course they can appreciate that. In the course of my teaching, I teach at a very small university, and usually I'm the only elective that, for that semester. So I often get students that are not very enthusiastic about the topic. In fact, they sit at the back, they lean back, and they think, what a load of, well, I'll plow through it so that I can graduate. About 3 or 4 weeks in, as we've talked about memory and attention, I hear them click forward, and they get it. They see that I'm not just talking about something mumbo-jumbo, I'm talking about something useful, and it pertains to what they want to do. These guys, mostly guys, and the development teams that I've worked with, when they get it, they become my biggest champions. And I know, because where I've been working, the next project, I get called in. We need to have Magatora on the team. My students, they will refer my friends. Somebody will come up to me and say, oh, I want to take your course because my friend told me that I should come. They will call me after they get employed and say, okay, we need somebody, doing the things that you talked about. Where can I find them? And that's what I need. I need the developers, the development teams to champion for the user, right? And they don't know how to do this now because they don't know what we do and why it's important. But we do. We have the superpowers. We have to be very diligent in spreading the gospel, in educating, in talking to them. When we're working with them, during lunch, our friend developers, everybody, telling them about why we are important, because then they'll call upon us when we need it. When the development project starts, and usually then people hire development teams first, right? And then sometimes they'll ask for a designer. If the development team is asking for a designer, we'll get better results, right? And that's the sort of collaboration that we want to focus on, and therefore we can create a better world, right? Let's go do it. Mike says we have time for one question. Yes.
I was wondering if you could say a few words about how this relates to agile development.
One word about that. I think As with any sort of software development methodology, collaboration is key, and Agile wants to emphasize that. But within the framework that was created, they really didn't think about the role of the designer. Am I right? How many people have had this problem? They show up for an Agile team and they're like, you're not the product owner, you're not a, are you a pig or a chicken, Bothers me more than you can. yeah. So I've seen the Agile development team do this really well, but that's when the collaboration has been there. When the team has, accepted that, okay, we don't know if she's a pig or a chicken, but she's useful, so let's keep her. But I've also seen this fall apart because people are like, I don't know what to do with your feedback because it doesn't fit within the framework that's created. So I think it boils down to the team rather than the methodology, if that makes sense.